I had been dreaming about this day for years. Owning my own ranch, out where the air smelled like pine and earth instead of exhaust and traffic. When I finally got the call that the bank had approved the purchase of the old, bankrupted ranch, I felt like I had won the lottery, even though the place was in shambles. Broken fences, overgrown grass taller than my knees, and a gate that hung crooked on its hinges. But I didn't care. This was mine. Mine, my slice of freedom. The drive out there had been long, winding through narrow country roads, but the closer I got, the faster my heart beat. Every mile felt like a countdown to a new life. I imagined waking up to the sunrise over the fields, tending to a small herd of cattle, maybe even putting on a cowboy hat that actually fit me. I laughed at the thought, me, a city kid playing cowboy, but the excitement was real and it was intoxicating. As I turned onto the gravel driveway leading to the ranch, something in the back of my mind nagged me. There were 4 trucks parked across the road. At first, I thought they were just neighbors, curious about the new owner. But then I saw them sitting there, engines idling, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see their eyes. My stomach twisted. There was no friendly wave, no welcome to the neighborhood. Just 4 trucks, lined up like sentinels. My first thought was, this can't be happening. Did I buy the wrong ranch? I shook my head and tried to laugh it off. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just how people in rural areas welcomed newcomers. But as I reached for the rusty latch of the gate, I noticed movement in the trucks. A man stepped out of the first one, boots crunching on the gravel, and my chest tightened. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stared at me, like I was trespassing on land that didn't belong to me. I gripped the gate tighter, suddenly aware of how small I felt in the middle of all the space. My excitement was slipping, replaced by fear and disbelief. 4 trucks for 1 person. I glanced at the other 3 vehicles. More men, more silent stares. The engines hummed like low growls. I swallowed hard. I had purchased this ranch, but did they know that? Did the bank papers matter at all here? I stepped forward, trying to put on what I hoped looked like confidence. Hello, I just bought this ranch," I called out, my voice cracking slightly. The man in the first truck tilted his head, slow and deliberate, and then laughed, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You're trespassing," he said simply. No hello, no introduction, just a sentence that made my chest tighten and my hands tremble. I wanted to argue, to explain that I was the legal owner, but before I could form words, the second truck door opened. Another man stepped out, hands on his hips, looking me over like a kid in a sandbox. My heart raced. I could see the tension building in their posture. It was clear they weren't here to chat. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, imagining all the ranch dreams I had, all the freedom I had finally fought for. And then the first man walked toward the gate, deliberately slow, like he was savoring the fear in me. My throat went dry. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was on my land, yes, but would it matter when they didn't recognize that? I stepped back, clutching the gate, and felt a mix of anger and panic swirl inside me. This is ridiculous, I told myself. I bought this place fair and square, but the trucks weren't moving. The men weren't joking. My new life, the dream ranch I had been imagining for months, was suddenly a cage. And then I realized they weren't here for a friendly welcome. They were here for me. I had no idea why, and I had no idea what was coming next. All I knew was that in the hours it took to drive out here, my dream ranch had turned into a place I didn't recognize. A place of tension, fear, and a problem I wasn't prepared to solve. I took a shaky step forward, trying to appear calm, but my heart was pounding like a drum. The first man stopped a few feet from me and smiled. Not kindly, not welcomingly, just a smile that said, "You're in my territory now." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't going to be simple. This was going to be a battle, one I hadn't signed up for, one I didn't yet understand, and one I might not be ready to win. I froze for a moment, gripping the rusty gate so tightly that my knuckles ached. The man's smile didn't make me feel welcomed. It made me feel exposed, like I'd stumbled into someone else's world uninvited. 4 trucks, 4 strangers, and 1 crooked gate stood between me and the life I had imagined. My dream ranch, my slice of freedom, was suddenly a pressure cooker about to blow. The first man stepped closer, boots crunching over the gravel, and I noticed every detail: the way his fingers flexed, like he was ready for trouble, the way his eyes scanned me, measuring. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, calmer this time, but with a weight in his voice that made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. I tried to steady my voice. I just bought this ranch. The bank finalized everything this morning. It's mine." My words felt hollow, even to me. Would legal ownership matter out here? I couldn't tell. The second man moved to flank me, keeping his distance but making his presence impossible to ignore. He nodded toward one of the trucks, the tinted windows reflecting the late afternoon sun. "You're new," he said slowly. "Rules don't care who's new." "Rules?" I asked, swallowing hard. "This ranch has been abandoned for years. I don't even know what rules you're talking about." The first man's lips twitched. "You'll find out soon enough." Then he leaned casually against the gate, like he owned the place, and my pulse jumped. Why do these people think they have any right here? I thought. I could feel the anxiety building in my chest, hot and sharp. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, but I couldn't. This was my land. I tried humor, because sometimes a joke is the only weapon you have when fear creeps in. "You know," I said, forcing a laugh, "I just bought this place. I wasn't expecting a welcome committee of 4 trucks. Did I miss the invitation?" They didn't laugh. One of them shook his head slowly, and my stomach sank. Humor didn't work here. Logic probably wouldn't work either. I realized I was out of my depth, and yet, somehow, I couldn't back down, not now. I stepped forward cautiously, trying to assert myself. "Look, I paid for this ranch. It's mine. You can't." But before I could finish, the second man raised a hand, cutting me off. "You're not the first to think that," he said, voice low. "And you won't be the last." His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The third truck door opened, and another man stepped out, holding a clipboard. He didn't say anything, just walked to the edge of the gravel and began writing, like he was taking notes on my every move. I glanced at him, confused. Notes on me. The tension was suffocating. I could feel my palms getting sweaty, my chest tight. Every muscle in my body wanted to bolt, but my mind kept whispering, "You own this land. You can't just run." I tried to keep calm, moving to close the gate behind me. That's when I noticed the fourth truck slowly inching closer, engine idling, lights glaring. My heart leapt into my throat. This wasn't just a standoff anymore, it was a circle tightening around me. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my voice again. "If there's a problem, I want to solve it. I just bought this ranch. Let's talk like reasonable people." The first man shook his head, almost imperceptibly but firmly. "Reasonable," he said, his voice a whisper now, dangerous in its calmness. "We'll see about that." For a moment, everything seemed frozen. The dust from the driveway hung in the air, the hum of the trucks sounded louder than it should, and I realized I was completely alone. Alone, except for 4 strangers who didn't seem to care who I was or that this was my property. Then suddenly, one of the men leaned forward, fingers brushing the gate. Just a little. Not enough to open it fully, but enough to let me know they were testing boundaries. My pulse surged. I could feel adrenaline taking over every thought, every nerve in my body. And in that instant, I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. This was going to be a fight, not with fists, but with nerves, wits, and maybe even luck. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Okay," I whispered to myself, "think, you've got paperwork, you've got the law, you've got something." But even as I whispered those words, the first man smiled again. That same cold, unreadable smile that made me feel like a trespasser in my own life. And then he said something I'll never forget. "You shouldn't have bought this ranch." When he said, "You shouldn't have bought this ranch," something in me snapped. My heart was still hammering from the standoff, but anger surged alongside the fear. "Excuse me," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel it wobble. "I bought this land fair and square. The bank approved everything. It's mine." The man leaned casually against the gate, his eyes cold, unreadable. "Ownership doesn't mean freedom," he said, almost casually, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He gestured to the other trucks, and the men straightened, their silence like a wall pressing in around me. "You're new here. There are rules, rules that must be followed." "Rules," I laughed nervously, a dry, bitter sound. "Rules. I just bought a bankrupted ranch that hasn't had a neighbor for years. Rules don't exist here." The second man tilted his head, slow, deliberate, and his lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, they exist, you just don't know them yet." A cold chill ran down my spine. That was it, the tone, the certainty, they weren't bluffing. These weren't friendly neighbors checking in on a new rancher. They were enforcers. I didn't understand how or why, but it was clear they thought I was violating something serious enough to justify this siege at my own gate. I tried reasoning, my hands raised in a desperate attempt at peace. "Look, I'm happy to follow the law. I'll whatever, just tell me what I'm doing wrong and I'll fix it." The first man's eyes narrowed, and for a second I thought he might laugh at me, but instead he just shook his head slowly. "It's not just one law, it's everything. This property has obligations you're unaware of. Regulations, fines, previous agreements, and some things you can't even see on paper." I blinked, my brain struggling to process what he was saying. Obligations, agreements. I had the bank papers in my glove box showing I had legally bought the ranch. That shouldn't matter. A third man, the one with the clipboard, finally spoke. His voice was calm but precise, slicing through my panic. "You're lucky we arrived when we did. Most people would have ignored the warnings. Most people would have resisted." He paused, tapping the pen against the clipboard. "We're patient, but we're thorough." I swallowed hard. "Warnings? I didn't receive any warnings." I shouted, the words bouncing off the empty air between us, but the trucks didn't flinch. Their presence made it clear they had anticipated my argument. I could feel panic rising, twisting in my gut. My mind raced, trying to figure out what I was missing. I had bought a ranch empty, bankrupt, abandoned, and suddenly, I was facing some sort of unspoken authority that claimed control over my own property. I looked past them to the horizon, the sun dipping low behind the trees. I imagined the freedom I had dreamed of, riding through open fields, the smell of earth and pine, the silence of the ranch. But that dream felt impossibly far away now, like a mirage I couldn't reach. I clenched my fists and stepped closer to the gate, forcing my voice to be steady despite the fear coursing through me. "If there's a rule, a fine, an obligation, tell me. I'll pay it, I'll sign it. I'll do whatever you want, but leave me my ranch." The first man tilted his head, considering me for a long moment, like I was a puzzle he hadn't solved yet. Then he said, slow and deliberate, "You can pay, you can sign, but that doesn't change the fact that this ranch isn't just yours." My stomach dropped. "Not mine, what do you mean?" The man leaned in slightly, and for a brief moment, I could see the faintest glint of amusement, or maybe it was cruelty, in his eyes. "It belongs to us as much as it belongs to you, and we're here to make sure you learn that the hard way." I staggered back, my chest tightening. What the hell does that mean? I thought, I just bought a piece of land. I shouldn't have to fight for it this way. I realized then that this wasn't just about ownership. It was about control, about fear, about rules I hadn't even known existed, and consequences I couldn't begin to imagine. My hands shook as I gripped the gate. I wanted to call the police, but something told me that wouldn't help. These men weren't ordinary neighbors, and they weren't ordinary enforcers. They were a force I hadn't understood until now, a shadow of authority hanging over this place that was supposed to be mine. And then the first man took a step closer, his presence looming, and said, "You have choices, but every choice has a price. Decide carefully." And that's when I realized, the ranch I had dreamed of, the freedom I had imagined, was suddenly a battlefield. I stepped back from the gate, my mind racing faster than my heart. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, but where would I go? My truck was on the other side of the yard, and the nearest road stretched for miles. This was my land, at least legally, but I couldn't help feeling trapped. The 4 trucks were still there, engines humming low, like predators circling a cornered animal. I glanced around the ranch, taking in the broken fences, the overgrown grass, the rusted windmill that creaked with the wind. If I could just put some distance between me and them, maybe I could figure something out. But the first man stepped closer again, boots crunching, his eyes cold and unblinking. My throat went dry. I swallowed, trying to steady my shaking hands. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't trained for confrontations like this. I was just a guy who had bought a ranch for peace, for freedom. And yet, here I was, faced with 4 strangers acting like they owned every inch of it. I looked at the gate, then at the fence. Maybe I could create some sort of barrier, even if it was temporary. I grabbed a length of rope from the truck bed, tying it between the fence posts. It wasn't much, but it was something. My heart pounded with adrenaline as I realized I was improvising, like some action movie character, except my hands were trembling too much to do it perfectly. The first man watched silently, leaning against the gate, almost amused. "That won't stop anything," he said. I forced a smirk, my voice stronger than I felt. "Maybe not, but it's a start." The second man stepped to the side, surveying the area as if calculating my every move. The third one, clipboard in hand, scribbled quickly, then looked up at me, his expression unreadable. And the fourth truck moved slightly, the headlights illuminating my hands as I gripped the rope like it was a lifeline. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about fences or gates. It was about intimidation. They were trying to make me feel small, make me question my right to be here. And for a second, I felt it, fear twisting in my gut, hot and sharp. I took a deep breath. "Okay, think you've got this." I remembered the bank papers in my truck, the proof that I had bought the ranch legally. Maybe that could help, maybe not, but I had to try something. Slowly, cautiously, I reached for my phone, keeping one eye on the men. Before I could even unlock it, the first man spoke again. "Don't reach for anything," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. "You move too fast, and things could get complicated." I froze, my finger hovering over the screen. Complicated. That word hung in the air, heavier than anything else. I realized then that these men weren't just here to intimidate, they were testing me, pushing me, seeing how far I could be pushed before I broke. I tried to reason with them, my voice steady even though my hands shook. "I just want to understand, tell me what I'm missing. I'll follow the rules, whatever rules exist, but leave me to my property, please." The first man's eyes flicked to the others, then back to me. "You're brave," he said slowly. "Or foolish, maybe both. Either way, bravery won't save you if you don't learn fast." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. He was right. Bravery alone wouldn't save me. I needed strategy. I needed leverage. I needed something I didn't have yet. The trucks didn't move, but the tension was unbearable. Every second stretched into eternity. I could hear the wind rustling through the overgrown grass, the distant creak of the old windmill, the quiet hum of engines. And through it all, I felt like my ranch, the place I had dreamed about for years, was slipping away before I even had a chance to live in it. Then, almost casually, the first man leaned forward slightly and said something that made my stomach drop. "You have until sundown to prove you belong here." Sundown? Less than a few hours to figure out rules I didn't even know existed, to convince these strangers that I was supposed to be on my own property, and to survive whatever they had planned if I failed. I stepped back, clutching the rope like it was a lifeline, my mind racing with questions and fears. What did they want? How far would they go? And most importantly, could I outsmart them before night fell? For the first time, I realized that this ranch wasn't just a piece of land. It was a battleground. And I was the unwilling combatant, armed only with my wits, determination, and a stubborn refusal to be chased off the place I had just bought. The sun dipped lower behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the overgrown grass. The trucks remained, silent sentinels, waiting. I tightened my grip on the rope, feeling a spark of defiance ignite inside me. Whatever this was, I wasn't going down without a fight. By sundown, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a standoff, it was a situation I didn't understand at all. I had bought a ranch that had been abandoned for years, and suddenly, I was facing four strangers who seemed to have a rulebook I had never seen. Something wasn't right, and I had a sinking feeling it went beyond these men. I took a deep breath and decided I had to find answers. My hands were shaking, but determination surged through me. I had to understand what I was dealing with, or I'd never reclaim the peace I had dreamed about. I cautiously moved past the gate, keeping the rope as a flimsy barrier in my hands. The men didn't stop me this time. They watched silently from the trucks, their eyes unreadable, as if daring me to make a wrong move. The feeling of being studied, measured, and judged was suffocating. I started walking toward the old ranch house, a dilapidated structure with peeling paint and broken windows. Inside, I found a stack of mail in the mailbox. Most of it was years old, yellowed envelopes from banks, utility companies, and strangely, an HOA. An HOA, that's when it clicked. This ranch was under a homeowners association, even after going bankrupt. I picked up one of the letters, trembling. It was a fine from over a decade ago. The HOA claimed violations, unmaintained property, unauthorized structures, and even something about a restricted water source. My stomach dropped. I had just bought the ranch, but these men, these enforcers, they weren't lying when they said rules existed here. I rifled through more mail, finding old meeting minutes, notices, and a strange binder labeled property compliance. The rules were ridiculous, some seemingly invented decades ago, some impossible to enforce, but someone somehow had kept them alive. And now I was the target. I couldn't believe it. I had purchased what I thought was an abandoned ranch, a blank canvas for freedom, and instead I had inherited a web of bureaucratic nightmares. My mind raced, trying to piece together how this could have escalated to a gate surrounded by 4 trucks and men who clearly expected me to bend or break. I could hear the engines still humming outside. I peeked through the window and saw them watching, silent, like hawks waiting for their prey. Their presence wasn't just intimidation, it was surveillance. Every movement I made, every step I took was being monitored. Panic mixed with frustration. I didn't even know what I was fighting for. I whispered to myself, "How can you follow rules you don't know exist?" And then I noticed something else. Surveillance cameras. Small, dusty, but functional, pointed directly at the driveway and the gate. Whoever had been here before me had gone to lengths to make sure the property was watched, documented, controlled. I realized the men outside weren't just enforcing rules, they were enforcing fear. They wanted to show me that I wasn't free here, no matter what the bank papers said. I felt a mixture of anger and defiance rise inside me. I wasn't going to be intimidated. This was my ranch. I had worked too hard, fought too long, and spent every dime I had to claim this place. And now, I understood what I was up against. I took a deep breath, my mind racing for a plan. I had to gather evidence, figure out exactly what rules were being enforced, and prove that I was the rightful owner. And I needed to do it before night fell, before these men decided to escalate. But even as I formed a plan, a wave of doubt hit me. How had a bankrupted ranch become this complicated? How had I stumbled into a place with ghosts of bureaucracy, rules no one enforced for decades, and men willing to intimidate me over them? I looked out the window again, and the trucks were still there, engines low, lights reflecting off the broken fence. The first man leaned against the gate, arms crossed, his gaze piercing. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a threat, a warning. Don't underestimate us. I knew then that the coming hours would determine whether I could take control of my dream ranch, or if I would be forced to surrender to rules I didn't even know existed. I felt my stomach knot, but underneath it, a spark of determination flickered. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't letting a mysterious HOA and 4 trucks dictate the life I had fought for. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would uncover every rule, every fine, every secret this ranch held, and I would face these men head-on, no matter what it took. Little did I know, the deeper I dug, the stranger and more dangerous this situation would become. By the time the sun dipped behind the horizon, the ranch had transformed into a place of shadows and uncertainty. The overgrown grass whispered in the wind, the old windmill creaked ominously, and the air felt heavy, almost alive with anticipation. I paced in front of the house, glancing at the 4 trucks still parked like sentinels across the gravel driveway. They hadn't moved all day. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to unnerve anyone. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Fear was creeping in, but beneath it, determination burned brighter. I had come this far, spent my life savings, and faced down my own doubts just to get here. I wasn't going to be intimidated by 4 strangers claiming authority over my ranch. I refused. I glanced at the old farm tools leaning against the barn and the leftover supplies in the truck bed. I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't a soldier or a cop, but maybe I could use what I had. I gathered ropes, flashlights, and a few old fence posts. I positioned them along the driveway as makeshift barriers, not expecting to stop anyone physically, but to create the illusion of preparation. Sometimes, perception mattered as much as reality. I took a deep breath and went inside the house, rifling through the HOA binder I had found earlier. Meeting minutes, fines, letters. I devoured every word, trying to find loopholes, mistakes, anything I could use. The binders smelled of old paper and dust, but each page felt like a weapon. If I could prove that the rules they were enforcing weren't valid, maybe I could reclaim control without violence. Still, my mind kept wandering to the men outside. I could hear their muffled voices and occasional movements. My imagination ran wild, picturing all the ways this could go wrong. I had to remind myself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help me, and I needed every ounce of focus I could muster. I tried humor to ease the tension, muttering to myself, "Okay, cowboy, you bought the ranch. You're not leaving. You're not scared mostly." It didn't help much, but it kept me from freezing entirely. As the sky darkened, the first truck's headlights flicked on, cutting through the twilight. The men were signaling, or maybe just marking their territory. Either way, it reminded me that time was running out. I had to act, and I had to act smart. I set up a small flashlight inside the house, aimed at the front window, so I could see anyone approaching the gate. Every shadow seemed threatening, every rustle of leaves a warning. My heart thumped in my chest as I imagined the first man stepping forward, guns, or worse, authority, ready to intimidate me further. I thought about my plan. I couldn't just rely on paperwork and barricades. I needed a strategy. I needed leverage. I decided to gather evidence, take photos of the trucks, record their interactions, document everything. If anything escalated, I wanted proof that I was the rightful owner, that I had not broken any law. The night grew darker, and the ranch felt like a different place entirely. The open fields that once promised freedom now seemed like a trap. My mind raced with scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. But beneath it all, a stubborn flame of defiance burned. I wouldn't be chased off my own land. I paced near the window, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. I reminded myself that knowledge was power. I had the HOA documents. I had the law on my side. I had my wits. That had to be enough. And then I heard it, a crunch of gravel near the gate. My pulse spiked. I froze, peering through the window. One of the men was stepping out of his truck, flashlight in hand, moving slowly toward the gate. The others remained in the trucks, silent, observing. I swallowed hard. This was it. The confrontation was about to begin. Everything I had learned, every precaution I had taken, every ounce of courage I could muster, it all came down to this moment. I gripped the flashlight tighter and whispered to myself, "Okay, you can do this. Stay calm, stay sharp, and remember you belong here." The first man's shadow stretched across the gravel, moving closer, and I knew that the next few minutes would decide whether I could finally take control of my ranch, or if these strangers would dictate the life I thought I had just bought. For the first time, I felt the full weight of the challenge ahead, and somehow, that weight made me focus sharper, think faster, and realize that surrender was not an option. Tonight, the ranch wasn't just land, it was a battlefield, and I was ready to fight. The night had settled fully over the ranch, swallowing the fields and fences in darkness, but the headlights of the 4 trucks made the shadows long and threatening. I gripped the flashlight in one hand, my phone in the other, ready to record anything that happened. My stomach twisted in knots, but beneath the fear, a spark of determination burned. I wasn't leaving my ranch, not tonight, not ever. The first man stepped forward from the gate, his silhouette sharp against the beams of the headlights. "It's time," he said simply, his voice carrying an authority that made my chest tighten. The others remained in their trucks, silent, their gazes fixed on me like predators studying their prey. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stand tall. "If this is about the HOA," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I have documents. I know the rules and I can comply. But I own this ranch. I have the right to be here." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, considering me like I was a puzzle. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You do," he said. "But ownership isn't enough when agreements from the past haven't been honored." My heart sank. Agreements from the past? My head was spinning. What more could there possibly be? But before I could ask, something unexpected happened. The third man, clipboard in hand, stepped forward. He opened it and began flipping through pages. Then he looked up at me with wide eyes. "Wait a second," he said. "This isn't the property listed in our records. The bank finalized the transfer this morning. You legally own this ranch." I blinked. "I do," I said cautiously, my voice trembling. "So you're just here to intimidate me?" The first man's expression shifted. For the first time, I saw something other than cold calculation, a hint of embarrassment, maybe even relief. "We were misinformed," he admitted. "We thought there were ongoing violations, fines, previous claims. It seems the records weren't updated after the bankruptcy. That changes things." I stared at him, disbelief mixing with relief. "So, you're not going to stop me?" "No," he said slowly, raising his hands in surrender. "You're the legal owner. You're entitled to the property. We overstepped." I felt the tension drain from my shoulders like water pouring out of a bucket. 4 trucks, 4 men, all that fear and adrenaline, and it turned out they had no real claim. It was absurd, laughable even, but my laughter was shaky and laced with disbelief. I couldn't resist a little humor, despite the nerves still thrumming through me. "So, let me get this straight," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've spent the day defending my ranch from a highly trained HOA strike force for no reason." The first man gave a faint, awkward smile. "Technically, yes." I shook my head, chuckling nervously. "I can't believe this. I bought a ranch to get away from city chaos, and this happens within hours." The tension finally broke. The other men slumped in their seats, engines idling. The first man stepped back, his silhouette shrinking under the headlights. "We'll leave, and we apologize for the intimidation," he said. I nodded, still feeling my pulse racing. Relief mingled with lingering adrenaline. The ranch was mine. The freedom I had imagined was finally real. But I couldn't ignore the absurdity of the situation. 4 men had come to my gate, engines rumbling, shadows long, all over rules that didn't exist anymore. As they drove off, I stepped toward the gate, my hands shaking but my heart lighter than it had been all day. I glanced at the moonlit fields, at the windmill creaking softly in the night, and I realized something. The ranch wasn't just land anymore. It was a test. A challenge I hadn't expected, but one I had survived. And in that moment, I promised myself, no matter what future HOA letters arrived, no matter what surprises the past left behind, I would defend my ranch. I would protect this dream I had fought for. I laughed quietly to myself, the sound echoing over the fields. 4 trucks, a dozen fines, and a whole lot of fear for nothing. Well, nothing that matters now. But even as the adrenaline faded and calm settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The ranch had secrets, yes, but it also had a story that wasn't finished. And if anything tried to threaten it again, I knew I would be ready. Tonight, I learned something important. Ownership isn't just about papers. It's about courage, persistence, and refusing to back down when everything tries to push you out. And with that, I stepped into the ranch under the moonlight, finally feeling like it was truly mine. The night air was cool against my skin as I stood at the gate, watching the last of the trucks disappear down the gravel road. The headlights faded, leaving only the soft glow of the moon over the fields, the old windmill creaking gently in the breeze. My ranch, my dream, was finally mine. Really mine. After hours of fear, confusion, and tension, I could finally breathe. I walked slowly through the overgrown grass, letting my fingers brush against the tall weeds. Each step felt surreal. Just hours ago, I had been trapped, cornered, terrified that strangers with trucks and unknown authority would somehow claim my life's dream. And now, the silence was mine. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. I came out here for peace and freedom, I muttered to myself. And I got 4 trucks, a standoff, and a full-blown HOA apocalypse instead. The absurdity of it hit me, and despite the adrenaline still racing through my veins, I couldn't help but smile. I checked the gate, making sure it was secure. The rope I had tied earlier wasn't much, but it had served its purpose. A small barrier, a reminder that I wasn't going to be intimidated. I stepped back and looked at the ranch house, the barns, the fences, and the vast fields stretching into darkness. This place was more than property. It was freedom, challenge, and proof that perseverance mattered. The next day, I walked around the property with purpose. I took pictures of every corner, documented the fences, the gates, and the old windmill. I wanted a record, not because I expected trouble, but because I had learned that sometimes, even legal ownership isn't enough. Preparation mattered, knowledge mattered, and courage mattered most of all. I couldn't help but reflect on the events of the past hours. The fear, the tension, the adrenaline, it had all felt like a test. And in a way, it had been. I had learned that freedom didn't come easily. Even in a place as remote as my ranch, bureaucracy and rules, some outdated, some obscure, could threaten what you thought was yours. But surviving that, standing my ground, and refusing to be intimidated, that had made the land truly mine. I chuckled at my own thoughts. Who knew that buying a bankrupted ranch would turn into such a drama? 4 trucks, men in the shadows, clandestine fines, and long-forgotten HOA rules. I could practically hear a narrator in a movie saying, "And so, our hero survived the unimaginable." Despite the humor, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I had faced fear, uncertainty, and the absurdity of bureaucracy head-on, and I had come out on top. The ranch was mine, but more importantly, I had proven to myself that I could handle whatever challenges came with it. I poured myself a cup of coffee in the old kitchen, leaning against the counter and looking out the window. The moonlight danced over the fields, and the silence was comforting, almost sacred. For the first time, I truly felt at home. And yet, even as I sipped my coffee, a small voice in the back of my mind reminded me that the ranch still had secrets. Old HOAs, neglected rules, and perhaps a neighbor or two who thought they had authority. The story wasn't over. There would be letters, maybe some inspections, and undoubtedly more challenges. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I smiled, realizing that this ranch, this land, wasn't just property. It was a symbol of persistence, courage, and the determination to claim what was rightfully yours, no matter how bizarre or intimidating the obstacles. I stepped outside and walked along the fence line, the cool night air brushing my face. For the first time, I felt a quiet pride. This wasn't just about land. It was about resilience, about refusing to let fear dictate your life, about standing firm when the world seemed determined to push you away. And as I looked up at the stars, stretching endlessly over the ranch, I made a promise to myself. No matter what the future held, I would defend this place. I would protect it. And I would never forget the day 4 trucks and a mysterious HOA tried and failed to scare me off my own land. Because I had learned something invaluable. Ownership isn't just a piece of paper. It's courage, persistence, and the refusal to back down. And with that thought, I stepped back inside the house, closed the door behind me, and finally felt the peace I had dreamed about for so long. The ranch was mine, really mine. Every HOA has a story on HOA